So, Louise, you've been in Decatur this week talking to veterans. What is happening in terms of veterans and their employment?
So the reason why I got into the story in the first place is because what was really striking to me about the fact that like all these cuts are happening across the federal government, right? And then so there's all these discussions like within the kind of like what Elon Musk is saying, what Trump is saying about how they're kind of cutting DEI positions the whole time. So like there's all these discussions about how that they're reducing the size of the federal government, and particularly about how they're cutting the size of like DEI employment. So that's diversity, equity, and inclusion. So people who've like come from disadvantaged backgrounds have been given like preferential treatment for jobs because of that. They're kind of cutting those jobs. And then so I spoke to some veterans organizations who told me that actually veterans are some of the biggest recipients of DEI. And then as a result of that, then because like veterans are kind of overrepresented in federal government, then the cuts that are happening under Elon Musk mean that loads and loads of veterans are getting fired from their jobs in federal government. And then so that's what we went to look into.
I was staggered by the numbers in your story about veterans making up a third of federal employees. And that's enormous.
It's enormous. And I think it's one of those things where when you think about the people who are involved in these DEI programs, then the first people that spring to mind aren't necessarily veterans. But because of like preferential hiring programs that have existed since the Second World War, then a lot of veterans are employed in federal government. And that's because of the service that they're given to their country. And because of that, then they're given preferential treatment when they seek federal employment. And then so what I thought was so fascinating is that the way that veterans organizations and veterans in general have reacted to these like firings, which Elon Musk's organization Doge has really brought to bear on the US government. So loads, like I think it's about 20,000 people so far have been fired under Doge, and 6,000 of those, it's estimated, are veterans. And then so veterans in general tend to vote Republican. They lean Republican, but now after these firings, it's really an open question of like, where are these people going to go? Like a lot of veterans who had previously supported Trump are now thinking like, well, actually, like, is he the guy who's been supporting us all along? Because that they're the ones who are losing their jobs in federal government.
Yeah, I mean, as your piece says, 20,000 of the local government, of total government employees sacked on the orders of Doge, and there's a further 75,000 who've accepted voluntary redundancy. I mean, I know that some of them have been returned to work because there've been a flurry of court orders challenging these firings, but it's unclear, isn't it, whether they will return to their jobs or for how long.
It's really unclear, and I think like at the moment there's this big kind of we're in completely uncharted waters legally at the moment. There's Elon Musk, who is the world's richest man. He is an unelected billionaire who has been given huge power in the US government, has ordered the firing of tens of thousands of people from the federal government. They've been sacked. Judges have then, people have then appealed those decisions. Judges have then seen those decisions and said, actually, this isn't right at all. We need to reinstate these people. Then the question is, like, given that the president supports Elon Musk, where does that leave us? Like, how are these judges' orders going to be received? Are these people going to be reinstated? If so, for how long? Will they actually have their jobs back? And a lot of the veterans that I spoke to for this story, they told me, like, all they want to do is work. This is, they just desperately want to go back to their jobs. And that's it. And the fact that they've been sacked and then told that they can go back on paid administrative leave, that's kind of not acceptable to them. They say, like, we're hard workers. We want to go back to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's probably worth explaining, Louise, for anyone who doesn't know. Veterans are really seen as kind of they're venerated in the US, aren't they? In a way that I don't think we necessarily treat our veterans in the UK. I mean, certainly when I lived in the US, I was so struck by how soldiers still travel in uniform. They're thanked for their service. They board planes first. There is a veneration of military service in the US, which of course Trump himself swerved.
Oh, completely. And like, yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that's one of the most striking things when you as a Brit move to the US is that you see, like, when you're boarding a plane, they'll say, like active veterans, like, or like, sorry, active service members, like, please come to the front first. Thank you for your service. And, you know, they're really venerated in American society. But at the same time, you know, we have Trump, who's been nicknamed Private Bone Spurs, you know, swerved being drafted into the Vietnam War. You know, he's never served in the military. And so I think that there's a real, like, despite the fact that veterans in general, I think it's 61% tend to lean Republican in elections, then at the same time, then there's a kind of general mistrust, I think, of the fact that Trump has overseen all these changes, which are meaning that so many veterans are losing their jobs, and that's starting to gain ground here in the US.
Yeah, and there's midterm elections coming up next year. I mean, do you think this is a potential voting bloc that could help the Democrats maybe win back the House or the Senate next year, if even just a few of them sort of shift to voting Democrat?
Well, the Democrats certainly think so. I think that in this question of the veterans being fired from federal government jobs, the veterans have, it's like, for the Democrats, it's Christmas. This is, so many of their congressmen, so many of their representatives have noticed this and are trying to latch onto it. So I spoke to a congressman called Joe Courtney from Connecticut, who was telling me that he'd had you know, a voter in his area who'd voted for Trump before, who was a veteran, who'd been fired from his job, and, you know, was now kind of backing him. And I think that that's like a kind of straw that a lot of Democrats are clutching onto. And I don't know whether it will work. I don't know whether it will, you know, change the midterms for them. But the Democrats certainly think they will. So we saw at the when Trump gave his big speech, it wasn't, you know, the State of the Union equivalent a month ago. They that so many of the Democrats brought along their constituents who were veterans who had been fired from their jobs. I think they certainly believe that this could be a kind of a thing that could swing the midterms in their favor.
Interesting. I mean, I think it's also worth pointing out, Louise, that the knock-on effect of veterans losing their jobs in particular is so huge because, as mentioned in your piece, large numbers of them are disabled through military service or have PTSD. And I think it's worth making clear that if you lose your job in America, you will most likely lose your health insurance too, because mostly your health insurance is tied to your job. So you'll lose health insurance for yourself and your family. And this is a group with large numbers of physical and mental health issues.
No, 100%. I think this is so important. Like, when we're talking about the cuts that are happening at the Department of Veterans Affairs, the VA, they're talking about cutting 70,000 jobs there. So even if that means that, like, you know, and they've said, the Republicans have said, yes, sure, we'll cut the number of jobs at the Department of Veterans Affairs, but this is not going to affect the level of service that we provide to our veterans. But we've already seen, you know, happening in front of us, that that service that is provided to veterans in terms of the medical insurance, as you say, the medical insurance that's provided to their family, you know, so that's like, you know, your kids being able to go to the dentist, your kids being able to go to the doctor, like that is in danger at the moment. I spoke to a social worker at the VA who told me that she had overseen these clinics where, because Doge had, under Elon Musk, had cut so many of the contracts that were given to the clinics, then it meant that their landlines, as in their telephone lines, were cut. That meant that veterans who were experiencing mental health crises were all of a sudden not able to, you know, be taken to hospital. Like, staff just couldn't call through the landlines to ambulances to get them picked up. And then, so I think that's like a kind of extreme example of what's going to be happening to veterans' health benefits. But we've seen like a slow erosion of what is being given to them. You know, it's already, veterans are complaining, people that I spoke to were already complaining about how they weren't able to access services quickly. It was already taking longer for people to answer the phones because so many people have been fired. And then, so, yeah, I mean, like, given how many veterans there are, and, like, you know, so many of them are disabled, so many of them are older, like a third of the veterans in the US are from the Vietnam War. You know, they're getting on and they're having like health complications, and so are their families. And then, so I think this is going to have like a devastating knock-on effect to veterans and families of veterans across the US.